welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers retrial. We are on the defense's case, part 10. I want to apologize before we get started that I've missed several days this week on both this and the Delphi trial transcript read through. I've been basically fighting a migraine for the past 4 days. It comes and goes in waves and it's not fun, and I've been taking migraine meds, and at this point I can't really take many more. So it's just frustrating and I feel lousy. So sorry, I apologize. I'm still feeling lousy, but I didn't want to miss any more days. So I'm going to push through this one, and I'm understandably, sorry for my lack of enthusiasm today. It's not that I don't have it, it's just it's not coming through very well with how I'm feeling. So, with that said, and I also have to keep the light down because it's really bothering my head. So we're gonna try this and see how it goes, because the light from the screen and just reading everything has been just hurting me, feeling nauseous, lightheaded, easily winded. So it's all those things combined that, it's like when you have autoimmune and you've got this uh, migraine, your body's already fighting all this other stuff, and then you get this migraine on top of it, and it just wears you out. So I apologize. Let's get started. Um, no more about that. Sorry. So let's move on we're going to pick up where we left off, which is Dr. Martin Fackler, womb ballistics expert. He is on the very tail end. This is the last of his testimony, I believe. So after that, we're going to get into some arguments between the attorneys who have some uh, they have different, legal takes on what is allowed in and isn't, and all that kind of thing. And they're going to talk about scheduling and stuff like that, because there's a lot of the defense just started their case, and they're, getting situated with the prosecution on all of their evidence. So let's let's get started. This is the afternoon of Wednesday, November 22nd, 1995. We just came back from, I presume, lunch, and the court says, we're in court with everybody. Is there something that you wanted to talk about? Ms. Nahara, for the prosecution, says, yes, Your Honor. I believe the court has basically told the defense that today was the day to get us the report from Mr. Morton. Counsel now tells me that they don't have a report. The court says, we'll talk about that. Ms. Abramson says that's what I suggested. The court says, after we finish with this witness, because I want to get the testimony of this witness completed. Ms. Nair says, all right, that's fine. The court says, let's get the jury out, please. The jury enters the courtroom and the following proceedings are held. So we're going to continue with recross. And Mr. Khan is doing the questioning for the state. Mr. Khan says, Doctor, I think as we broke for lunch, we were going over this pellet count that is reflected on the chart there, and I had asked you if you had reviewed the 1992 amendment to the autopsy report that was written by Dr. Golden. Do you recall that? Yes, I do, and I have it before me. Okay. In that 1992 amendment, does he make reference to your 4 wounds to the or 4 pellet defects to the left forearm of Kitty Menendez? He says there are 3 shotgun pellet wounds. 3 wounds. Do you know where we get the number 4 from that is reflected on that chart? I think we get it from the photograph, but he also talks here. That's the posterior aspect. No, I don't know where we get the 4 from, except that's what it looked like to me when I continued them on, or when I counted them. Oh my God. Sorry. That's what it looked like to me when I counted them on the photograph. So possibly you're saying that on the photograph you observe 4 wounds, even though Dr. Golden only indicates in his report that there were 3? Well, I thought I had. We'll get to that photograph. Does Dr. Golden describe as part of the cluster of wounds an exit laceration? Yes. And where does he place that exit laceration? Yes, he says examination of posterior aspect. Actually, he says that's in the posterior aspect of the left forearm. And these others, the 3, are in the anterior aspect of the forearm. Uh-huh. So by the posterior aspect, that refers to this part of the forearm? No, that's the anterior. So where's the posterior aspect? It would be on the opposite side. Well, we don't know where he pointed, so we don't know what he meant. So could you point for us and show the jury what you're referring to? The witness says, "Can I stand up, Your Honor?" The court says, "Sure, go ahead." The witness says, "That's a position, that's a so-called anatomic position, which is a standard position used to describe these. The anatomic position is like so." And he demonstrates with palms facing upwards. And the anterior aspect would be here, and the posterior aspect, meaning back, would be here. So the posterior is the back, the anterior is the front. Mr. Khan says, "Okay, so according to Dr. Golden, there was only one, or that there was one exit laceration on the posterior aspect. Is that correct?" Well, he says one exit laceration, and then talks about 2 abrasions there, but only talks about one exit laceration. That is correct. And he says that the 3 shotgun pellet wounds are on the interior aspect of the left forearm. Is that correct? Yes, that's what he said. And that would be on the inside of the arm. Is that correct? Yes, yes, that's what they would indicate. Okay. Now, the photo that you were referring to just a moment ago was that 187 that depicts the left arm of Kitty Menendez. Yes. And what do you see? Mr. Levin says, "Kitty Menendez?" The witness says, "Well, what I see is what I thought were 4 pellet wound holes, and the 4 I'm talking about here would be on the dorsal aspect, posterior aspect." Mr. Khan says, "So, is that in conflict with the autopsy report, the 1992 amendment by Dr. Golden?" Yes. "And you didn't have a chance to examine these 4 marks, did you?" I don't understand. Examine it on the person? You never looked at the body, did you?" "No, of course not." "So what you see here are simply dark marks. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And going by the report of Dr. Golden, though, these dark marks that you see in this photograph are not pellet defects. Is that correct?" "Well, they may or may not be. According to Dr. Golden, they're not, and I'd have to defer to him. I don't think this is not a wound I concentrated on and described in my report, so you know." "Well, doctor, I didn't pursue it any further." "Doctor, whether or not you concentrated on it in your report, you testified to that a little while ago on that chart, didn't you?" "No, I did not. That was a hypothetical, and I was asked, assuming there were 4 holes in the forearm, to add them up. That's all I was asked. I wasn't asked if I verified there were 4 in the forearm, 4 wounds." Let's go through this. Do you verify any of this information by which counsel came up with a total of 33? Certainly the left breast. I clearly verify that. The left elbow and the right arm and the lower one, I can't verify in 4. No, I cannot. Okay. And in addition to not verifying that last one, when we speak about 7 for the left elbow, what are you referring to there? Well, I think we counted it up with up above. We're talking about 2, and the arm there are actually 5 pellets there, and there's 9 defects, and we postulated that two of these might be entrants and ricocheted off the bone to explain the other two as exit wounds. Okay, so are we totaling the if you remember, uh, in his testimony, he said in the arm that, there were extra defects than there were pellets. So he postulated that some of the pellets ricocheted off of the bone and exited out of the arm, leaving another defect, and that would account for why the pellet was missing. So that was his theory here. So the next question. Okay, so are we totaling pellet when you say that you can verify 7, 6, and 17, which would give us a total of 29? Are you saying that you are verifying 29 separate pellets, or are you referring to pellet defects? Pellet defects in the breast. I mean, I thought we made that clear. Okay. That we had that we had holes, go 16 holes in the breast rather than being able to account for every one of them. This information that you verify here, this total of 20, it's not 29 pellets, it's 29 pellet defects. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. So a defect is basically a mark on the skin. So there's a mark on the skin that shows there could have been 29, whatever, 29, there could have been up to 29 pellet defects, which doesn't mean that there were that many pellets. We have a total of 20, but not, I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you have more defects than you have pellets in the arm. He says, yes, that's correct. And in fact, of the 7 that went into the elbow, you said that 2 of them could have gone on and passed into another surface. Is that correct? That's a possibility. And 2 that could have passed on into another surface could have went into the right arm of Jose Menendez, or they could have went into the breast of Kitty Menendez. Is that correct? Well, no. I think we also mentioned that ricocheting off the bone would cause enough change in angle to preclude that. The ricocheting off the bone would preclude that? Yes. And why would that preclude that? Because it would change the angle of those from the other wounds in the pellet group. All right, so 5 remained inside. Yes. And 2 ricocheted off. Yes. And you're saying it's possible for that ricochet to have then struck the right arm of Jose Menendez? No, I never said that. I don't think the whole trial I've used the word impossible. I think it's highly unlikely. So he wouldn't, as a scientist, he wouldn't say impossible, but he would use words like probable, likely, unlikely, things like that. So why is that highly unlikely that the 2 that ricocheted off could have struck his right arm? Ms. Amerson says, objection asked and answered. The court overrules that and says you can answer the question. The witness says, well, I just think the way they're lined up, angle with the bone, I don't think the angle would line up. I mean, I think it would ricochet off. I don't think it would line up. I can't say it's impossible that it would. I'm saying it's my opinion that it probably won't. What do you mean it wouldn't line up? What are you referring to? Objection asked and answered. Overruled. The witness says, have 2 ricochets follow a parallel trajectory after they leave an arm, when the thing that it ricocheted off of is a cylindrical object, which would be extremely unlikely because the angle which they would hit, it would have to be exactly the same, and I think this would be highly unlikely. So 2 pellets could not hit the same surface at a similar angle and ricochet off at a similar angle. Is that what you're telling us? Counselor, no, I never said that. I said it was highly unlikely. I did not say it could. I did not say it's impossible. I said it was highly unlikely. And why is it highly unlikely? So you see how this attorney keeps trying to put words in his mouth? And it's, if I were this doctor, I'd be very frustrated, which it seems like it is frustrating to him, but he's handling it like a champ. He's being very professional with his responses. So why is it unlikely for two pellets to hit a surface and ricochet off at the same angle? Because, counselor, objection asked and answered, overruled, you can answer the question. The witness says, because, counselor, we're not talking of a surface like a wall, we're talking of a surface like a cylindrical object, a bone, and therefore random hits on this bone. If you hit above the centrum, you're going to hit low. If you hit below the centrum, you're going to ricochet low. I think it's unlikely you'd have two hit in the same position, but it's not impossible. Mr. Khan says, so if two pellets were to ricochet off and go into another surface, such as the right arm of Jose Menendez or the breast of Kitty Menendez, then that total of 29 pellet defects would mean that what we have is a total of 27 pellets. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative, overruled. The witness says, if that did in fact happen, yes. I want to a thought that occurred to me when they were asking this question about the ricocheting off, wouldn't the defects then be in the same location if that's what happened? Wouldn't the defects be, you know, right one on top of another if the exit and the entrance wounds of these ricocheted pellets, wouldn't they be on top of one another? But they're not, so that wouldn't happen anyways. I don't know. We spend a lot of time on this stuff when I feel like it's kind of stupid. Anyways, um, Ms. Abramson says objection, argumentative. The court says overruled. The witness says if that did in fact happen, yes. Mr. Khan says, all right, let me now turn to the x-ray of Jose Menendez, which is 176. Now this, you said, is an x-ray, excuse me, sorry, an x-ray of the left leg of Jose Menendez. Is that correct? Yes. Let me put that up on the board for the jury to see. And you said that it is your opinion that Jose Menendez was not standing, well, was standing at the time that he received the wound to his left leg because of the position of the bones as they appear in that x-ray. Is that correct? Yes. And that is because it appears to you that the weight of Jose Menendez forced his upper bone down alongside the lower bone rather than remaining up here on top of that bone. Is that correct? That is correct. Okay. Now, when the body of Jose Menendez was being transported from the crime scene, do you know how many people were moving that body? No. When the body was being lifted up from the sofa and placed on the plastic in front of the coffee table, do you know how many men lifted up that body? No. Do you know which limbs they were pushing or pulling at the time that they lifted the body? Miss Abramson says, objection assumes facts, not an evidence. Overruled. Uh, yeah. What limbs were they pulling or pushing? That is not in evidence that they were doing any of those things, but okay. We'll just pretend like that's fact, Judge. The witness says no. Mr. Khan says, do you know anything about the movement of the body from the crime scene to the time that that x-ray was taken? No. Do you know when that x-ray was taken? Sometime before the autopsy. It's one of the autopsy x-rays. Okay. And in this case, do you know how much time elapsed from the time of the killing up until the time of the autopsy? No. Okay, well, you read the reports, didn't you? Oh, yes, I did. I assumed 1 or 2 days, and do you know what the coroner's office waited, or did you know that the coroner's office waited 2 full days before they did the autopsy in this case? Objection assumes facts, not an evidence. Sustained. Can you tell us when the autopsy took place based upon the reports. I'll look and find out. Talking about Jose, right? This autopsy on Jose was reported to have been done on the 23rd of August at 9:30 in 1989. So remember, the crimes took place on the 20th. So we're now 2 days later. Okay, and do you know when those crime scene photographs were taken? No, I do not. It had to be after the crime, but I'm not sure how long after the crime. So is it your understanding that 48 hours, at least 2 days, elapsed from the time of the police investigation at the crime scene to the time that the autopsy began? I don't know that for a certainty, but it seems like what one would be able to expect. It's about the usual time. So there's nothing unusual about a 48-hour wait, I guess. And this x-ray here, does it appear that there's a time printed on this x-ray up in the upper left-hand corner? Yes. And what is the date and time that appears on the x-ray? 8:23:89, about 7 or 8 in the morning. Okay. You don't know who touched that leg or how many people touched that leg or what was done with that leg prior to the time that that x-ray was taken. Is that correct? Objection. Assumes facts, not an evidence. Overruled. No, I don't. So are we just assuming then that there were a bunch of people touching the leg and pulling on the leg and doing whatever to the leg? I mean, but the judge allows it in. Okay, now let me show you two additional x-rays here. One is 168 and the other is 177. Yes? Now in these x-rays, do you also see the same phenomena that you observed in this x-ray, which is the bones, rather than remaining separate from each other, have come alongside each other? Well, most markedly on this one. This one is difficult to say. A little bit on this one, yeah. On this one, there's an overriding. You say there's a little bit on this one, which is 177, and which is the left arm of Jose Menendez, and that it is most markedly apparent in 168, which is the left leg of Kitty Menendez. Is that correct? That was very confusing. He says, yes, that's correct. And so, if this phenomena, as observed in the left leg of Jose Menendez, would cause you to conclude that he was standing at the time that the shot was fired, would that appear to be a similar phenomenon in 168 in the left leg of Kitty Menendez, cause you to conclude that she was also standing at the time that the shot was inflicted? I think one would be highly suggestive of that. However, that's a much more complicated wound because there's two shots involved rather than one. But it is suggestive of that, is that correct? Yes. And you said that you do observe some overlap over here where one bone comes down to where I'm pointing my pen and the other bone comes way up here where I'm now pointing my pen. Is that correct? If I can. The court says yes, you can clarify the x-ray. Mr. Khan says this is 177 I'm pointing to now. The witness says yes. If we're talking overlap, that's certainly overlap there. As far as foreshortening, there's minimum foreshortening, maybe a half inch, or certainly overlap of Mr. Khan cuts him off and says, can you tell us what the difference is between foreshortening and overlap? Overlap, if you have two bone ends you have two separate bone ends, and when you see them on x-ray, one is behind the other. Now in the lower arm you have two bones, and so if those bones are broken, one bone could be overlapping the other on the x-ray without there being any foreshortening. However, when you have a single bone like you have in the femur, in the upper leg, upper to the knee, there's only one. So if there is an overlap, then that means there's foreshortening also. And what do you mean by foreshortening? I'm sorry, let me just say shortening of the leg. But don't you see shortening in both photographs? I see very minimal shortening in the elbow. I see more of an overlap. Because there are two bones, there's an overlap there. Here we have only one bone, and so there's a separate piece in there, and I think there is considerable shortening of the extremity in this one of the leg of Kitty Menendez. Okay, how do you determine that what you are looking at in 177 is more indicative of overlap rather than foreshortening? If looking at the anatomy of the two bones, if I put this portion, this tip down here into the groove, I think that would line up very well. Perhaps you can mark that for the jury here. Put an arrow? What do you want me to do? Just make lines indicating what you are referring to. Okay, I'm talking to, this is a portion of the ulna, the upper portion of the ulna, which is broken right here. That's the lower tip of it now. It's difficult. I'll try to show an arrow. Okay, that's the tip of that. Now, it appears to me that this tip fits right in here, and if you fit that together, that would put the bone back together, and you have a shortening here, I'd estimate, as a ½ inch shortening. Here, on the other hand, on the leg, you have a free segment here, and you would have to add the segment between these two, and I would estimate a 3-inch shortening of the leg because of that. All right, now when you look at this x-ray here, 176, which is of the leg, you concluded that because of the relative portions of those two fragmented portions of the bone, that there was necessarily a pressure from top to bottom or from bottom to top, squeezing those two bones together. Is that correct? I postulate that as a likely reason for those to come together, yes. Okay. When you look at the bones in 177, isn't it also possible there that what caused that particular wound was the same type of phenomena, that is, a pressure from top to bottom pushing together? Well, some, but as I've tried to point out, the magnitude of the different, you can get some overwriting from muscle spasm, for instance, and this amount of overwriting, I would say, would not be unusual and could be explained by that phenomenon when you get this much override. I would suggest that another phenomena is probably there, which is the weight of the body. Well, what is the relative amount of displacement that that caused that shortening? Well, I suggested it would be on the magnitude of 2 inches, maybe a little more. What is the amount of displacement there that would cause that foreshortening? Asked and answered, Your Honor. Overruled. A little ½ inch or a little bit less. And what is the amount of displacement in 168 that would have caused that foreshortening? Asked and answered, Your Honor. Overruled. You can answer the question. The witness says, I think we have 2 to 3 inches there. Okay. So would the 2 or 3 inches there in that photograph cause you to conclude that you had a similar type pressure caused to the leg of Mary Menendez, that is, that she was standing at the time of the shooting? Asked and answered, Your Honor. Overruled. I think you would have to consider it, yes. When you look at the crime scene photographs of the left leg, do you see the pushing together of the leg that you are indicating took place in this case? I don't understand your question. In other words, when you look at the leg of Jose Menendez as he appears at the crime scene, do you see on in that photograph, the effect of the foreshortening? No, you don't see it on the photograph. I think it's masked by the fact that he has his knee bent at more than a 90-degree angle, which puts a stretch on the skin up there and masks it. There's nothing in those photographs at the crime scene that would verify your theory that there was, in fact, a foreshortening that was caused by his weight being pressed on his leg as opposed to some movement of the leg by people who transported the body, is there? Object, Your Honor, calls for speculation, assumes facts, not an evidence. Overruled. The witness says, could you state that again? Mr. Khan says, yes. Just from looking at the crime scene photos, there is nothing there that could corroborate the theory you're now suggesting, which is the foreshortening, which was caused by the weight being placed on the leg rather than the movement of the body sometime after the crime took place. Objection, argumentative, overruled. The witness says no. Mr. Khan says, all right, turning to the shots that were fired at Kitty Menendez, I believe that you indicated that many of the shots could have been fired while at Kitty Menendez while she was standing. Is that correct? Yes. I'm putting up on the board photographs I've already shown you previously, 197 and 194. 194 depicts the face of Kitty Menendez and 197 depicts the right arm area. Now, I believe that you indicated that, in your opinion, in response to a question by counsel, that Kitty Menendez could have received this wound to her right eye and remained standing after that wound. Is that correct? It's possible, certainly. And is it also your opinion that Kitty Menendez could have received this series of wounds or these two wounds to her right arm and still remained standing after receiving the wound to her right eye? Is that correct? Yes. And perhaps maybe she still didn't even feel pain. Is that correct? Yes. And you feel that in addition to those two wounds that she could have also received, let me show you 199, a photograph that I've previously showed you which depicts the wound to her clavicle area and mandible area of her right side. And you feel that she could have received those wounds as well and still remain standing. Is that possible? Or is that correct? Yeah, it's certainly possible, says the witness. And you feel that even after all those wounds that we are now looking at on that board, that perhaps she still didn't even feel the pain? Is that correct? It's possible. Perhaps she wasn't even bleeding. Is that correct? Miss Abramson says, objection, there's been no testimony about bleeding. The court says, well, he's asked a question now. The witness says she might not be bleeding massively, and she might be bleeding internally, especially from the ones in the clavicle area. Okay. And then I believe that you indicated that it's possible that after she received all these wounds, she may have positioned herself I think, the term was leaning on the couch with her leg bent when she received all of the gunshot wounds to her left leg. Is that correct? Ms. Abramson says, objection, misstates the testimony. Rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says, while directing your attention to let me show you 3 additional photographs. 198 is the photograph to the calf. 200 is the photograph of the wounds to the upper thigh, and 189 is the photograph depicting what has been described as an entry and exit wound to her left leg. Let me put those up for the jury. Those 3 photographs, which I've just put up on the board, show the wounds to Kitty's left leg. Is that correct? Yes. Your Honor, I'm going to object to counsel referring to people by their first names. The court says, yes. Mr. Khan says, I'm sorry, those 3 photographs reflect the wounds to the left leg of Kitty Menendez. Is that correct? Yes. And was it your testimony that all of those wounds would have occurred while Kitty Menendez was leaning on her couch with her leg bent? Object to the form of the question. There's been no such testimony. Overruled. I don't recall the leaning, but she could have. Yeah, I don't see any problem with the leaning. She might have been in the process of collapsing, and the wounds, one or two, or one of them, could have been inflicted while she was down. I can say about these wounds that certainly she would not be able to support any weight on her left leg after the entrance re-exit wounds that severely broke her femur, and, in my opinion, the wound in the middle, also, I think, probably broke her femur too. So I think either one of those probably would have caused her to lose support of that leg, and therefore she would have to fall. The one on the far side nearest me, however, would have nothing to do with the structural integrity of her skeleton and therefore would not affect whether she was standing or not. When you say that those wounds would have, or one or more of those shots might have caused her to fall, are you assuming that she was standing at the time that she received the leg wounds? I'm not assuming anything. I'm just telling you what I can tell you from these wounds. I'm telling you that if she were standing, she would not be standing very long after receiving two, well, at least, certainly at least one for sure, and the middle one probably. Let me clarify for the record which one you're referring to when you say the left one and the middle one. On the left, we have 189. The middle one you referred to was 200, and the one on the right is 198. In order for Kitty Menendez to have been standing at the time that the wound on the left was inflicted, that is 189, can you tell us where the shooter would have to be? I think in order for that to have been inflicted while she's standing, the direction of fire would have to be reversed, which is certainly not an unlikely thing. It's extremely difficult to tell from that wound which would be the entrance and exit. So I think there is a possibility here we must consider that maybe it went the opposite way, in which case it would be possible if she were standing, but I can't say for sure. Well, so far, I think that you've expressed the opinion that you agree with the previous opinions expressed. Sorry, that's really redundant. So far, I think that you've expressed the opinion that you agree with the previous opinions expressed in this case, that the wound was from the bottom of the leg through the back of the leg. The pellet defects are shown here in 200 and here on the top of the leg. Is that correct? Yes, I see no reason to disagree with that. But I might point out to you that in the initial autopsy photograph, both of those wounds we see facing us, were depicted as exit wounds, and therefore there has been previous confusion about this wound, and I, myself, looking at those two wounds, could not differentiate exit from entrance. So I think in that kind of a wound, that blown out wound, I think there was room for misinterpretation. These are very difficult to tell entrance from exit many times. In the way that those two wounds have been previously described as possibly being all part of a single shot to the left leg, only if her left leg, was brought together the way that is reflected in this doll here, Exhibit 205. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Okay, so in order for her to be standing at the time that that shot could have been fired, then what the shooter would have to be doing, according to what you're saying, is the shooter would have to come over to her and hold the shotgun like I am now holding it and fire it down into her leg. Is that correct? No, counselor. You're total I love how he's just like, no, counselor. You're totally misrepresenting what I said. If I could take the doll, yes, and show you. I think we tend to be looking at this case more in statics. She is standing or she is sitting. There are a lot of people that are moving, and if she's moving one leg before another and one bend at the knee, and one could have various positions such as that, which would make it not at all difficult. Okay. Miss Abramson says, let the record show, Your Honor, what the witness just did to the doll, so there's a record as to what he showed. The court says he just bent the leg back at the knee. Mr. Khan says, okay. And your opinion, then, is that the wound could have gone through the top of the leg and passed through to the bottom of the leg, would be inconsistent so far with the opinion reflected of Dr. Golden as reflected in his 95 amendment. Is that correct? Yes, that opinion would. I'm not saying that is my opinion. I'm saying that is a possibility that I cannot rule out. And I'm saying my opinion probably is it came the other way. But if you asked me if it's possible, yeah, it's possible. Your opinion is that it came what way? From below upward. And why is it your opinion that it came from below upward rather than upward downward? Actually, Dr. Golden was the one that did the autopsy, and I see no reason to disagree with him on that unless I had solid foundation to, and I don't have solid foundation to. Okay. You've asked me if it's possible to come in the other way, and yes, it is possible. Okay. Now, assuming that Dr. Golden is correct in his opinion that it was an upward, a shot that goes upward into the body rather than downward, an opinion which Dr. Lawrence also testified to. Ms. Abramson says, object to the form of the question, Your Honor. Mr. Khan says, assume. The court says, let's rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says, did you also read the testimony of Dr. Lawrence in which he indicated that he is of the same opinion? Yes. Okay. Now, assuming that Dr. Golden and Dr. Lawrence are correct, that was how the shot occurred from the bottom of the leg towards the top, in order for Kitty Menendez to have received that shot while in a standing position, where would the shooter have to be? If it came from the bottom up, if the position was as you've indicated here, it would not be possible because it would have to be down below the floor. So he doesn't like to say things are impossible, but this one is impossible. Okay, so assuming that Dr. Golden and Dr. Lawrence are right in regard to the direction of that wound, would you agree then that Kitty Menendez was not standing at the time that she received that wound? I've said all along I thought she probably wasn't. I'm telling you, looking at the evidence, I can't rule out that she might have been. Because you can't rule out the possibility that there was a shooter down to the floor shooting up at her. Is that correct? No, that's not correct. Well, why is that? The distance, you're asking me to assume a shooter is down there lying on his back with a shotgun practically on the floor shooting upward? No. It's just like, you're asking me to do this? Just no, not possible. Mr. Khan says, I'm asking you why you can't rule out the fact that Kitty Menendez was standing up if, in fact, Dr. Lawrence and Dr. Golden are correct in their conclusion that the shot was fired in an upward, that is, from the bottom of the leg towards the top. Well, she'd had to have had her leg up in an abnormally high position, the knee, in order to make any reasonable sense. I can't even get the model to do that, but so therefore I think it is unlikely that the shot was fired from below upward. I mean, makes sense if you can't even get the model to get the angle to construct it. Okay. And now, is it your conclusion that she may have been on the sofa at the time that the shot was fired? I think that's the most likely. The most likely of what? Of the possibilities we've been discussing. It's more likely she was on the sofa than she was on the floor? Yes. Why? Well, because if she was on the sofa, her leg lying parallel to the sofa, the shot could have easily come straight across at a height that would not be inconsistent with a shooter holding a shotgun. If you're talking about her on the floor, then it has to get much lower if you're talking about parallel. Now, depending on, you can put her on various positions on the floor on her back with the leg up in the air, and it's possible to make a downward angle. There's an infinite number of angles possible in this. If it's possible she was lying on the floor on her back while the shooter fired that shot into her leg, why then is it more likely that she was on the sofa? I thought I just explained that. Miss Abramson says, asked and answered, Your Honor. The court says he's asking you why you chose one over the other, if you do. The witness says, Well, yes, Your Honor. I said in answer to the last question, the reason I did is, very specifically, is because of the higher area and it would put the leg in a much more of a trajectory than that could be hit because it's up off the floor. And if on the floor, she has to be, in order for the shot to be landed, she almost has to be on her back with her leg angled upward. She's found on her right side, and if she's on her right side, then the shooter has to be down much closer to the floor. So, for this reason, I thought of the two, I would have to think that the leg on the sofa was more likely, but you certainly can't rule out either one. But it doesn't make sense that one of the shooters would have gotten on the floor to shoot her in that weird angle in the middle of all this. So, are you saying that this wound that we are now talking about, that is the wound that went through, or the wound depicted here that went just below her knee and then above her knee, could only have been inflicted with the shooter close to the floor? Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained. Are you saying that the shooter would have had to necessarily hold his gun low to shoot that shot? Objection misstates the testimony. Argumentative. Are you asking if she was in a certain position? Mr. Khan says yes. What I'm asking you is if she were on the floor with her leg bent, would the shooter necessarily have to hold the gun low to create that wound? If she's on the floor on her back with her leg bent, no. If she's on the floor as she is found with her legs relatively parallel lying on her right side, yes. Okay, you don't see any reason to rule out the possibility that she might have been on the floor on her back at the time that that shot was fired. Is that correct? Objection. Argumentative. Overruled. You can answer the question. I certainly have not ruled it out at all. I have merely said, based on everything we're talking about thus far, that she's found on her right side, it would be seemingly too unlikely that she had voluntarily rolled onto her right side if she was on her back in the first place, and especially when the injuries are on her right side. And the reason that we had for getting her on her back in the first place is frankly nonsensical. That she was knocked backwards by a shot in the face, so that's what got her on her back. And I don't think that makes any sense whatsoever. I think it's much more likely that when she fell on her right side and remained on her right side. So the way she was found was the way she fell, according to this doctor. Well, are you saying that when she went to the sofa, if indeed she did go to the sofa, she fell on that sofa? And then from the sofa onto the floor? Is it your opinion that both shots to her left leg, which you have testified to occurred while she was on the sofa? Both shots? No, I didn't testify. Both shots occurred while she was on the sofa. I didn't testify one occurred. I just pointed it out as a possibility. You're saying both shots occurred while she was on the sofa. Objection, argumentative. Rephrase the question. Are you saying that both shots to her left leg, occurred while she was on the sofa? No, I'm not. And why not? Because I'm not. We were talking about one shot, and now the next question is, were both shots? Well, my question is directed to the second shot. That is, the shot that went through the calf and then went through the thigh. Are you saying that that shot occurred to her or may have occurred to her while she was on the sofa? Yes. And are you saying that both of those two shots that I previously described, that is, the one around the knee, which we already discussed, as well as the one that I'm now referring to, which went through the calf and into the thigh, may also have occurred to her while she was on the sofa? I hadn't thought of that. I'll have to work it out here. I think it's unlikely that both would have occurred. I think maybe one or the other. And why is that? Actually, now that I'm looking at my own anatomy and reconstruct of it, yeah, I think it's possible maybe both of them did. To get that trajectory, that is, for both shots to strike her in the leg while she was on the sofa, would she have to keep her leg in a relatively fixed position? Actually, both of them are. Both of the angles are pretty parallel, and depending on how fast the shots were coming, well, I wouldn't say a fixed position for very long. It could have just been instantaneous and two shots could have occurred. It's a possibility. Did you see any evidence anywhere in the crime scene, in your review of the material in this case, that Kitty Menendez was ever far from where her body was found during any of the shots fired in this case? No. Object to the question as vague. The court says you're referring to when her body was found when the police arrived? Yes, Your Honor. Overruled. The witness says no. As far as you can see, all of the shots that were inflicted upon Kitty Menendez were inflicted when she was in between the coffee table and the sofa or on the sofa. They might have been. Do you see any evidence that she was ever in any other place, when any of the shots were inflicted? I'm aware of any. Turning to Jose now, let me once again put up that photograph of the crime scene. You've testified to Jose Menendez possibly moving from the area immediately to, as it appears in this photograph, to the right of the coffee table and where he is found at the time of the arrival of the police. Is that correct? Yes. Other than between these two locations, that is, where he was found at the time that the police arrived to the right of the coffee table, as it appears in this photograph, do you have any evidence from the crime scene or your review of the material in this case that Jose was ever in any other position? No. Now, you said that it is possible that there were two shots to the right arm of Jose Menendez which preceded the other shots fired to his body. Is that correct? That's possible. Okay. You said it is also possible that the shot to his right inner arm preceded the back of the right arm. Is that correct? That's possible. For the first shot, that is the shot to the right inner arm, you testified that that was from a distance of about 14 feet away. Your Honor, I'm going to object to this as cumulative and re-asking of the same question. Court says, we have gone over this. The witness says, unbelievable. Mr. Khan says, as far as this material is concerned, it's just foundation. Court says, let's get to the question. Mr. Khan says, my question is, were you contemplating in her scenario of that possibility that there was one shooter moving back and forth or that there were two shooters firing from different positions? I wasn't ever trying to form a scenario or reconstruction of this case, as I've said many times. Yes, but did you accept that as a possibility? Is that correct? Objection, argumentative. The witness says, except whether or not. The court says it's unclear as to what you meant. Mr. Khan says, what I'm referring to is the fact that the first shot to Jose Menendez may have been to the right inner arm from 14 feet away, and the second shot was to the back of his arm, to his right arm, from 3 feet away. Is that correct? It's a possibility, yes. And accepting that as a possibility in this case, did you make any assumptions regarding whether that was one shooter moving back and forth across the room, or did you make any assumptions as to whether it was two shooters firing from different locations? I would think more likely to be two shooters. Now, you testified that shotgun shots don't necessarily knock a person down. Is that correct? Objection, Your Honor. This has been asked and answered. The court says, let's get to the actual question. Mr. Khan says shotgun shots doesn't make a person spin around, does it? It does not physically impel a person to spin around, and I never said it did. Right. You said that those shots to Jose's arm could have preceded that those two shots to the right arm could have preceded shots to his left leg. Is that correct? Asked and answered, Your Honor. Sustained. In accepting the scenario of defense counsel that the shot to the left leg could have preceded the shot to the left elbow of Jose Menendez, did you assume, for purposes of accepting that possibility, that Jose Menendez, after being shot in the left leg, would have kept turning towards the location in the diagram where counsel depicted the position of Erik Menendez? Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to object to that as the witness says, I don't understand that question. It's too vague and far too complex. Court says the witness doesn't understand it. You'll have to re-ask. Okay. You'll recall that counsel posed to you a scenario in which Jose Menendez was shot in his left leg and that shot was followed by a shot to his left elbow. Is that correct? Yes. And you accepted that as a possibility. As a possibility, yes. Okay. In order for that shot, that is, the shot to his left elbow, to have taken place, did you assume for purposes of that hypothetical that Jose Menendez was still spinning around? Ms. Amerson says, object to the question, Your Honor. There's no testimony about spinning. Court says, rephrase the question. He is having a hard time getting this out. Yes. Did you assume for purposes of that hypothetical that Jose Menendez was turning in between the time he was shot in the left leg and the time that he was shot in the left elbow? During the time, I think could be very likely. He could, if standing evenly, balanced, not moving, and being shot in the left leg, could have fallen down. However, if he had been in the process of turning with his weight on the opposite leg at the time, he could have kept turning before he fell, and I think that's a likely possibility. And can you tell us, looking at this photograph of Jose Menendez, how far he would have kept turning before he ultimately came to rest in the position indicated in that photograph? I think he would have been very close to the front of the couch where he came to rest. And in order for that shot to have taken place, in order for that shot to his left elbow to have been the last shot to his, in order for the shot to his left elbow following the shot to his left leg, could you tell us where the shooter must have been? No. In the hypothetical posed by counsel in which she places Erik in front of the coffee table. Your Honor, I'm going to object already to the question because it misstates the hypothetical. Court says, well, he's going to put up a display here, and perhaps, Mr. Khan, you can rephrase the question again. Mr. Khan says, yes. Directing your attention now to the diagram depicting the den. In order for Jose Menendez to have received that shot to his left elbow after being shot in the left leg, can you tell us where his left elbow would have been relative to the shooter? Counsel, the problem here is we've said he was turning, and therefore he would swing a wide arc of maybe 180 degrees, which would include a great variety of positions. Uh-huh. And you don't have any evidence just from looking at the crime scene photographs and all of the material that you reviewed in this case, that he was ever turning, do you? Object to that as argumentative. Overruled, you may answer the question. Witness says no. Mr. Khan says, all right, I have no further questions. Any redirect? Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, very briefly. So we have some redirect or redirect from Erik's team. All right, Ms. Abramson says, didn't both Roger McCarthy and Dr. Lawrence indicate that they believed that pellets penetrated Mrs. Menendez's forearm from the posterior to anterior? Objection leading. It's argumentative, as phrased. Ms. Abramson says, you read Dr. Lawrence's testimony? Yes, I did. Why do we have to go over this again? Like, we already know he read the testimony. The foundation has already been laid, but whatever. Okay. Yes, I did. Did both of them count at least one pellet apiece for Mrs. Menendez? Left arm? Objection leading. Overruled. To the best of my recollection, yes. At this point, I'd have to read the testimony to be absolutely sure. To the best of your recollection, they each counted at least one pellet, correct? Yes. And to the best of your recollection, they each indicated an affiliation, did they not, between her left arm and her left breast wounds? Yes. And is there any photograph whatsoever that shows any defects or pellet wounds on the anterior, as you've described, the front portion of Mrs. Menendez's left arm? I'm unaware of any. Dr. Fackler, if I were to lift you up under your arms from behind, and I had Mr. Khan here lift you up by your ankles and pull, would that lead to this displacement or shortening of the leg, or would it straighten it back out? It would straighten it back out. Does the ability to move and change the lineup of the limbs of these decedents depend on whether or not at the time they were moved, uh, whether at the time they were moved, they were in full rigor mortis or not? I know very little about full rigor mortis and the time it takes to set in. That's really out of my field. Okay. I think if they were in full rigor mortis, I think that would have an effect, but that's really not an opinion I can give you without great certainty because I'm not an expert. Ms. Abramson says, I have nothing further. Mr. Khan says, nothing further, Your Honor. Court says, okay, let me see counsel about our scheduling here. Following proceedings were held at the bench. So we have a little sidebar right now. The court says, okay, we have a juror that has to leave at 3:15. I see you have Deputy Van Horn in the audience. Ms. Abramson says, yes. The court says, how long is this testimony going to take? It's going to take a couple of hours. Court says you have the option of starting with him or doing it fresh on Monday. Ms. Abramson says, I'd be happy to do it fresh on Monday. I wanted to talk to the court about whether or not we're going to be recessed when the jury recesses. I have all the three members of my family who are sick, and my daughter had a car crash. Court says, I intend to leave at 3:15. Ms. Abramson says, if I don't start with him, we can leave sooner. Court says, I'd like to resolve any issues that are still kicking around here before that. Ms. Amerson says, okay, we can do that. Let me ask Deputy Van Horn. Court says, is he available on Monday? What is your schedule? Ms. Amerson says, my experts are in dual battles to see who gets on first. Right now, I have Wecht or Morton for Monday, second of that team for Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, depending on how long it takes, and Van Horn and Linhart are on call to me. So those four are my next four witnesses in whatever order I can. Mr. Khan says, we haven't received. Ms. Amerson says, it's like the Bosnian peace treaty, whichever one I can get. Court says, there's still some issues of reports. Ms. Abramson says, I just have to make a call. Court says, I just want to get an idea of scheduling. Have you decided on Golden? Ms. Abramson said, oh, excuse me. My throat is getting dry. Hold on. Sorry about that. Ms. Abramson says, I'm not going to decide on Dr. Golden until I have a chance to go back to him with everyone's criticisms of his work and find out what he would say about it all, frankly. The court says, if not Dr. Golden, Ms. Abramson says, some of the neighbors who heard pop, 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 the next would be the boat people. The court says, and then what? Ms. Abramson says, and then my hope is Marta Cano. And then what? And then my client, didn't we give you the list? The court says, I'm just trying to see if there's any change since then. Miss Abramson says, no. The only thing about Marta Cano is her daughter is expecting another baby, so I've got to see if I can get her out here on time. The court says, if she doesn't do it, then your client? Miss Abramson says, yes. Could I just have a minute to speak to Deputy Van Horn? The court says, sure. The following proceedings were resumed in open court in the presence of the jury. So now the jury is back. So sidebar's over, and the jury, so in the presence of jury. Okay, so the jury's back in the room. And the court says, just taking a moment here to discuss something with one of the witnesses who's here. Miss Abramson says, okay, Your Honor. Court says, all right, the next witness, there is a witness here who we could start with but wouldn't finish, and it gets into moving exhibits around and dealing with different things that would take some time, and we wouldn't finish his testimony. And there are other witnesses that are scheduled for next week. So rather than start now without being able to finish, because one juror has to leave at 3:15 to catch a flight, so rather than start now, I think we'll just, as far as the jury is concerned, take our recess now. The lawyers and I will discuss some issues and then we'll be taking our recess. So we'll be letting you go with the same instruction I've given you all along, not to discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else, not to form any final opinions about it, not to permit yourself to be exposed to anything at all about this case outside the courtroom in any fashion, whether it's the news coverage, conversations, anything. And with that, I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and we'll see you back here Monday at 8:30. So, this is the Thanksgiving Day weekend. Wednesday going into Thanksgiving, they have to leave early because the witness has a flight and other people have other things going on too that they want to make sure, and witnesses need to, make it back to their homes as well, and families as well. So, at least everyone, just aside from the lawyers, are allowed to go home. So the court says the jury has left. There was some discussion regarding reports. Ms. Nahara says, yes, Your Honor. Ms. Abramson says, let me make a statement and we'll cut through, I think, very quickly. I had asked Mr. Morton if he could. I haven't talked to him much recently, and I didn't know if he had any additional findings over what he had sent to me in memo form, similar to what Dr. Fackler had done, mainly a critique of the work of failure analysis. And I asked him to write a report with any additional findings in classic report form. And when I last spoke to him yesterday, he has been also tied up in litigation, and he didn't think, unless I could get back to him late last night, that he would be able to get a new report to me. But I want to call my office and find out if indeed he did. And if he didn't, I am happy to turn over unredacted the notes that he had at an earlier stage of his investigation in this case, which is the only written notes I have unless he has sent another report. And that's something that was faxed to me on October 1st. I'm happy to give it to the prosecution if he has not prepared a more comprehensive report. That's where we're at. The court says, okay, is that the only issue that we're waiting on for Morton? Yes, or right. Mr. Khan says, but I would ask if there is no report at this time that counsel not call Mr. Morton on Monday then. We need some time to review this material. We would like to see his final report before he testifies. Ms. Abramson says there won't be a final report. If there is no report today, there won't be a final report, and we were ordered to give you what we had on today's date in order to call him on Monday, and that's what we're going to do. The court says, without getting into a discussion that might not be necessary, let's see if there is anything else. If not, this will be turned over, and then we'll see what your position is once you get it. All right, let's take a short break and give Ms. Abramson a chance to make a call. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. There's a pause in proceedings. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, the record should reflect that I have turned over some discovery from Mr. Morton, which were his targets, his test targets, 6 test targets that he did, plus a chart that he'd prepared that I received on November 9th, and I did turn those materials over to the prosecution, Your Honor. Court says, okay. And a recess was taken, and I'm going to stop here because I don't want to do a long recording only because I don't feel the greatest, and talking, exhaling is kind of making me dizzy, lightheaded. The reading itself isn't making my headache come back, which is good. It's just making me, struggling to catch my breath here and not be dizzy reading. So we'll stop here, and tomorrow we will continue where we left off. So the very tail end of their arguments for the day, and that will take us into their Thanksgiving Day weekend. So, thank you guys for watching. Please hit the like button on your way out if you haven't done so already. Bye, guys.